Thank you, Whitney. Tonight, I am not going to be talking about specifically about work in which I have been involved. It'll automatically happen. But as you know, scheduled tomorrow at the seminar to discuss field theory using 2 or 3 examples of the whole process. Tonight is really Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, of which I am just a part. And I'm going to try to share with you something that's never been done before. We are going to try to look at ourselves through me. And naturally, it's going to be colored by my view of history of Skidmore, Owings and Merrill. But with this gray hair, I do represent the past as well as the present, and I hope a lot more of the future. But in looking at the past, and we're going to try to start at the beginning, I'm going to try to cover time not as Nat Owings did in the first evening, or not as Tom Eierman or Louis Kahn have done in specific areas. But I'm going to try to look at the work of SOM. And originally, this lecture was supposed to be divided into 2 parts, from the beginning as far as SOM was concerned to 1960, and again 1960 to the present. This appeared to be too much history, really, for the purpose of the lecture. So I was sort of selected by default to be the person to try to collapse all of these years into one evening. And I must say, even with 5 projectors up there ready to work, it may still be too much history to achieve the kind of goal I'm after for this evening. For the value in this evening is not with the deluge of work, effort or hope and desire expressed on our part as either young designers trying to create buildings or reflected in the buildings themselves. But this is a kind of invaluable collection of cross-section of what's happened in American technology. The relationship between technology and form, and the aesthetic mores of that special product we call architecture, and its relation to a particular period in American life. For you see, SOM has been extremely fortunate to be sort of come into being at this moment in time, and we have been particularly fortunate as part of SOM to participate in this. And I'm going to prove that, I hope, this evening. In many cases, SOM has been in the main a refiner of those aesthetic goals which have come from the Bauhaus. Each of us, as original participants in SOM and as design partners, have found our point in time was really following the acceptance of modern architecture in American life. Now, this is very hard for you to believe and conceive in 1973. But pre-World War II, modern architecture was still the issue. The final gasp of it must be the colonial style or nothing was going. This new chance was really not an aesthetic victory, however. But looking back on it now with hindsight, we can see it was the beginning of the big explosion of wealth in the United States of America. For between 1930 and 1940, the wealth of the United States as expressed in the gross national product increased with just 10%, or 1% per year, for 10 years. And between 1940 and 1950, the increase was 185%. And this expansionist pattern forced technology, up until then just an academic discussion. And this means that while the population of the United States was growing, the demands of increased wealth impacted on the demand and the needs for services and amenities to this new increasing population. For now, the concept of the quality of life receives a new interpretation and many new rationalizations. I think this is an important point because it affects much your future. And for this reason, I've prepared a slide which we will now project on the wall, if we may, and project a slide from the back of the room. Now, this slide, there we are. I hope you can read it. It starts with 1930 and goes to 1970. It shows the population of the United States in millions. And it picks just the numbers of our offices, New York, Chicago, San Francisco, Portland, and Washington, D.C. And also, it picks what is known as the SEMSA population, or the, in the census, the areas surrounding cities that then were upon. You'll notice that in 1930, this method of census numbering didn't even exist. So you have to understand how really new numbers are. And what is important on the very top, you'll see the gross national product. Unfortunately, it's out of phase, so it slips. And you'll see that in 1930 rather, in U.S., in billions of dollars, it was 91.1. In 1940, it was 100.6. In 1950, it was 284,769. In 1960, 503,731. And in 1970, 976,445, or just short of that $1 trillion that everyone talks about. Now, what is important is to look and see what happened between 1940 and 1950. Again, a doubling between 1950 and 1960, and then another doubling between 1960 and 1970. This makes you understand a little more clearly why the size of buildings has increased so much, why the number of units have increased, and why certain patterns in the use of materials, techniques, form have happened. And in a sense, it gives us no credit to say, but to stand here and say, we were here at the time. And through the kind of genius of Knapp and others who saw certain opportunities, those of us who were working in design had a chance to create, and within this period of time, participate in this enormous undertaking of change. Now, the important thing for you in looking at this chart is each of you could at this moment in time suggest to yourself what 1980 will say. Is it true that we will jump from 976, and if you increase at the same rate, this has to jump to $2 trillion? To continue at the same rate of growth, this has to double as the last one doubled, as the last one doubled. And if that is true, you will also notice that the population from 1960 to 1970 has only gone from 175 million to 203 million. And this expansion, while huge in numbers and in problems, you see reflects to what I was talking about, the relationship between the quality of life and the kind of goals we established, both outside our population goals and in the inherent wealth and the use of that wealth in the United States. Now, it's not really my own opinion about this, because this is a statement of numbers. Thank you for the slide. We'll turn that slide off and go back. But in 1950, the Museum of Modern Art asked Skidmore, Owings & Merrill to participate in an exhibition. And I had only been with Skidmore, Owings & Merrill for 3 years. And so to participate in the exhibition was really quite an honor for myself as an ambitious young designer. And that's one side of the story. But the other side of the story is what Museum of Modern Art wrote in this, this is the brochure. It's called Buildings for Business and Government. And it says, this is dated 1950. When a museum exhibits a painting, a piece of sculpture, an architectural drawing, or a model, the first questions in minds of both the staff and the public is, who is the painter, the sculptor, the architect who designed it? In the past, all of the architectural shows the Museum of Modern Art has exhibited has been designer shows, the work of individuals like Le Corbusier, Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, Frank Lloyd Wright, or the work of collaborating partners like Adler and Sullivan, or Howe and Lescott. When the museum invited Skidmore, Owings and Merrill to exhibit its recent building, it did so because this firm, composed of a group of single designers working exclusively in the modern idiom, produces imaginative, serviceable, and sophisticated architecture deserving of special attention. The single designers who function within this organization have no fear of loss of individuality. They're able to work within their corporate framework because they understand and employ the vocabulary and grammar which developed from the aesthetic conception of the 20s. They work together animated by two disciplines which they all share, the discipline of modern architecture and the discipline of American organizational methods. I would like to believe that we always behave that way. It is, however, a statement of essential fact, and it does reflect what Skidmore, Owings and Merrill set out to do. It also says what I'm going to try to do tonight. I'm going to try to show you in picture form this history. And this history will of necessity have a personal bias. Unfortunately, through a couple of very pragmatic reasons. I'm amazed to discover the number of slides that have disappeared in the archives or non-archives of Skidmore, Owings and Merrill. I'm amazed at the fact that we cannot seem to assemble this material easily or quickly. And in terms of the kinds of pictures you'd like to show, they're not always available. But I do think I have enough photographs here tonight, enough slides to give you some sense of the body of work of the firm. And I'm trying to give you both a sense of time and a sense of location. So you will see how each of the offices have operated a little differently. We will try to emphasize the work of the different offices. We will try constantly do it within the relationship of a time frame. The first series of slides will be between 1933 up to 1960 in the Air Force Academy. The Air Force Academy has not been selected because it is a project I worked on, but rather because it became a very important project in the history of Skidmore, Owings and Merrill. The next will take a series of education using all the offices from 1950 to the present. Then we'll take a look at all the offices in terms of low-rise buildings, because then we're going to emphasize the Portland office. Then we're going to take a look at some interiors. Then we're going to do high-rise office buildings starting on the West Coast, and then we're going to go to New York, then we're going to go to Chicago, and then we're going to end up with planning. Now, this is a large order. I hope it is of interest to you. If you get tired, you're most welcome to leave. I am not trying to outdo Bucky Fuller in this evening's episode, but I do think it is very important for you for the following reasons. For me, it has only one. It kind of reminds me, has it all been worthwhile? But for you, that's not the question. For you, the question is, what will history write? How will you participate in that future? How will you, in doing your work, begin to build on what we have done as we had to build on what the past had done for us? And it is a much more difficult project for you than it was for us, because there was a very small body of created work. Just as the MoMA article says, There were just the gods and their works and a few others and their super little houses, essentially. And there was not a great body of modern architecture. It has all happened in my creative lifespan. And we have, in a sense, all of us, given you an amazing amount of work, but you have to ferret through and decide your own direction. You have to correlate that direction with the impact of the economics of the country as it affects you, and as this concept of the quality of life affects the kind of work you can do. Since we are on 5 slides tonight, and since it's impossible for the television camera to pick them all up, since I am not running for office, and I am not pretty, there is no reason for that camera to be playing for the next hour or so. So we've discussed it with the television people, and we'll turn off the television camera, and we will move now to the slides. I am going, with your permission also, to give you, not gossip, but a little history about some of the buildings and their impact on the firm, which may not be impact on you. If you notice in the upper left-hand corner is what Nat talked about, the 1933 World's Fair. It was a mécanique, it was a marvelous kind of thing. I was a child, it was the biggest thing, and probably making me an architect was to really have confirmed that this could happen in the city in which I was growing up. And for Nat, of course, and for Skidmore, it was their chance to get together and form, through Mr. Heinz, an opportunity to develop a client who lived with the firm up until today. And then we have the center picture above, which is the New York World's Fair, which we were able to get a few little jobs. I'm sorry I don't have pictures of them. We did not do the Trilon and Parasphere, or whatever, Hemisphere rather, which you see there. But I think we had something to do with doctoring up the Venezuelan pavilion. It's a sort of a history that I can't really find. But the next picture, and the picture down below in panel 4, represents the first breakthrough project for Skidmore, Owings & Merrill, and it's done by Gordon Bunshaft. And Gordon did this reception center for naval recruits at the U.S. Naval Great Lakes up north of Chicago. This is, in the parlance of military architecture, an breakthrough. They used modern design. And for the next 4 years, I think maybe even 10, this appeared in every brochure that Skidmore, Owings & Merrill ever put together in trying to get a new job, because it represented a major victory in moving an element of the U.S. government into a world of modern architecture. Now the next slide also represents early times, and it represents a building sitting over in Indianapolis. And it's really the lower building I'm talking about, because the second building was done about 8 years later in its standard life. You wouldn't believe it to be a Skidmore, Owings & Merrill building, perhaps. But we were looking and searching for a style and a technique. We were looking for the way into the new technology. Many of the designers who started out in Skidmore, Owings & Merrill were trained in the École de Beaux-Arts and moved with École de Beaux-Arts training into these new buildings. You can see it somewhat expressed on that building. Now we'll take the next bank of 5 slides. And you can see on the next bank of 5 slides that we were also interested at that time in almost anything we could get. We did the boiler plant, and we did a factory up at out at Tracy for Heinz out in California. Although the job was done in Chicago, we didn't have a California office. And on the upper right-hand corner, a major breakthrough was the Oak Ridge master plan, the opportunity to work with prefabricated housing, the opportunity to do the Oak Ridge High School, which is where I got on the trolley, and the Garden Apartments, which were the first contemporary buildings essentially contemporary buildings that the firm had done outside of Gordon Bunshaft. Next series. Oh, the bottom, of course, is J.C. Penney's, which you see in Monument Circle. And as you know, that relates to about 1948. That's still perhaps before some of you were born. The problem comes that the J.C. Penney's, I think, is a neat building. It responds to the square. It's essentially an École de Beaux-Arts building. It's limestone, treated with a bottom, middle, and a top, where you notice that the windows at the top are acting like a cornice. And it is a building that we worked evidently and struggled hard over. I was just beginning in the office in Oak Ridge. I didn't even know the building existed at the time. And the fact that it was being built represents the kind of multiple activities that the firm was already beginning to show. The next series. Next 5, please. Now you will notice that we still have industrial buildings, and the reason for showing the one on the upper left, you'll see that we were Kimberly-Clark up at Niagara, and we were beginning to see two kinds of architecture occurring at once. You can see the brick wall in the slide in the middle in the upper left, and the beginning of the exposed structure. You can see the effort at the transition to technology, the search for the non-École de Beaux-Arts aesthetic, or what does a building look like, moving into the more standard rituals of the definition of structure as an intimation of form. And then we see again even the inside of a mill at Kimberly-Clark, and then on the lower right-hand corner, slightly out of sequence, the other building at Monument Circle, which obviously does not have a bottom, middle, and top, and historically is an early curtain wall building with a very difficult site and an unresolved top and bottom. And that doesn't mean it should not be, it should be a Renaissance top and bottom. It just means that it was unresolved. That's a polite way to say we didn't solve it. Next series. Now, one of the most amazing things that happened in Skidmore, Owings & Merrill early was a dedication to art. This is what was then known as the Terrace Plaza, now called the Terrace Hilton in Cincinnati. You notice these projects are centered about the Middle West. They have no kind of international flavor at the time. They're where the jobs are. They're local, related to NAP and the Chicago office. But this is the first building in which we were really willing to ask ourselves a question: should we take the standard tack, or should we do a multi-use building? And in a sense, this is an early multi-use building. It has, as you know, the Bond store at that time and another store on the bottom. Has a hotel that didn't start until the 8th floor. Also had Marianne Strangal to do the tapestries and the fabrics. Had Miro, as you can see, in the gourmet room. Had a Steinberg in the main dining room, you can see on the lower right. And had our first dedication to art. And this is thanks primarily again to Gordon Bunshaft. And both Gordon Bunshaft and Bill Hartman, who are now senior partners, so to speak, in the firm, participated on this project. And it became, in a sense, an extremely important project in building the confidence in the firm, in their capacity to reach out, take another look at what an answer could be. In a sense, an extremely important project in building the confidence in the firm, in their capacity to reach out, take another look at what an answer could be, to look at their own aesthetic. It doesn't look like a very daring building. It's more daring in its assembly of parts than in its aesthetic form, as you notice. But it is daring in the sense, in terms of its willingness to bring culture to Buffalo, in the sense that Miro to Cincinnati, the time this was done, of course, is really quite early. We're talking about 1948. This is a long time ago for modern art. In fact, with the next series of slides, you will see what on earth happened to that room. The Miro was given to the Art Museum in Cincinnati, and slides 4 and 5 show the artist's rendition of how current culture in the gourmet room in the Hilton is now handled in Cincinnati. And it is a retrogression, if there ever occurred, in which we have what is now known as dining kitsch replacing Miro. You can see the early use of the alto furniture in the upper left-hand corner in the public rooms, and the sense of the fabrics in the in the main room, in the lobby. And you can see that this was an effort, an all-out effort on the part of the firm to try to do a complete project. So the Terrace Plaza is important not only to the individual designers, but it gave them confidence in being non-Middle Westerners and going out in the world, as well as giving the firm the confidence to look at a project in a fresh way. Next series, 5. Now, we didn't always continue in a straight line. You can see we were still doing buildings, as you can see in the upper left-hand corner, with what is known as the square window look, which is almost in again. It's gone around the circle and is almost back. But this was the effort at developing some hospital work, and this was done in both New York offices. And the lower left-hand corner, you can see the first open balcony public housing project developed by Chuck Wiley, and which turned out later to be the monster called Pruitt-Igoe. It's interesting that Chuck, in making this design, is for Ogden Courts. As you can see on the model on the right, proposed it be not over hollering distance to the kids down below. That was his criteria. I knew it to be his criteria, and of course it was bastardized, enlarged. The other buildings were made twice as high and twice as long. So you can see what happened to the concept in terms of increasing density can get out of hand when developed beyond the limits of control of the individual artist. And you can see in the upper right-hand corner an early church, but it was our first project in South America. It was an effort to do work with petroleum companies, and we did a series of master plans and individual buildings which were then constructed. And so you can see at the same time the work is beginning to develop confidence and moving outside. I can easily talk about this because it's projects in which I am not, of course, involved. So that was called Creo Petroleum. That was again 1949, and this was just post-World War II, and things were beginning to move out. Next series. We have an interesting thing happening. While we were working in what we call the square window phenomenon, we were also interested in a smooth facade. You notice the upper left-hand corner, that's Illinois Children's Home and Aid. It's in Chicago. Am Richardson, who's now the dean at Notre Dame, worked on this project and the TWA terminal, ticket office, which is in downtown Chicago. Both of them contain this very smooth window wall. I remember because my first training was with Am Richardson at Oak Ridge, and he was heading the design in the Chicago office as Bunchaft was then doing it in New York. And Am was very interested in that kind of use of technology and pushing the technology and the edges. It's an early example of a window wall, of a very selective one. While we look at the bottom of the upper right-hand corner on the major apartment houses that was done, then this is the Mayor Whittlesey, Skidmore, and Merrill apartment house in New York, and this was done in conjunction with them, and Gordon has lived in that building ever since it was done. And in the lower left-hand corner is the Vinegar Works, as we always called it, a kind of friendly terms. This was the administration building, which was late, and a very fine factory storage building, which Gordon Bunchaft did using standard parts, the slide of which has disappeared. It was published in the Forum. It had a beautiful red door, abstractly selected by Ezra Stoller. I think made him famous and made Gordon famous. and it was a fine warehouse, and then we didn't seem to do any more warehouses after that. They probably looked too expensive. But we went on to what has next happened, and that's banks. And then, of course, and there was New York, which went in for the banks, and the bank that you see in the upper left is a Chase Manhattan. It's a low-rise bank. It has the Harry Bertoyas in the middle, and you can see again the beginning of the so-called SOM technological style, which really does not look like Mies and does not look like Le Corbusier. It has a sort of a combination of a flair, of a spatial attitude more relating to Corbu, and the technological use of American equipment that only could be done here. And I think it's often, and it had, of course, Gordon's style and flair. Actually, however, the history should relate that the design of this building was done actually by a competition in the design room. And Gordon was heading up design and selected the design that was used. It formed the basis for this final scheme. And the man who did it went on to become a partner, retired early, and is no longer a partner at Skidmore, Owings & Merrill, but because he really found the pressure a little rough. And but in those days he was a young designer, and the future was hopefully all his. The lower right is a project in which Jack Train and Jack Train is now a partner in another firm, Metz, Train and Youngren, and I worked on, which incidentally is known as the air dock scheme. And in 1950, the client told us it never worked. If you notice, the aircraft have propellers. This was before jets. We were asked to project how to handle baggage and load passengers with the coming of the DC-7. And what should the future airports look like? So we designed this pod. We literally have this little machine coming out and you get on, all of which you're used to doing in O'Hare Airport today, and many airports throughout the country. But in 1950, this was a radical idea. It was turned down, and it didn't, come alive again for about 8 years. And out of it, however, Jack Train, as an engineer, developed new ways of handling baggage handling that went around the corner. So now every time you see baggage, it goes around the corner. You can thank Jack Train and an anonymous engineer for working out the system that made our little air dock scheme work. I forgotten all about this, frankly, until it's gone from my mind. I had no memory, actually. If I'd been asked to testify, I would have forgotten about it, except going through the archives to remember that this was another kind of thing that Skidmore, Owings & Merrill was involved in when we were searching to serve clients. And this is the case of United Airlines, and I'll tell you for a fact, that was not a project. That was Nat Owings talking to the then president of United Airlines, telling him that aircraft are going to change. You better be in the vanguard of change. I've got some bright young designers who will tell you how to do it. And that was us, you see. Then he would go back into the office and say, Netsch and Train, that we got to worry about how to handle aircraft in the future. And he'd get us all excited about it. And so we'd start in and try to make a project without a program, and gradually piece the program together through the factors of what were happening in the change in aircraft design. And it wasn't a very difficult thing once we got started. And the last in this particular sequence is a United Airlines, what else we did when we weren't worrying about baggage handling or how to load aircraft. You can see we were still doing what you'd call modest technological buildings. The structure shows Johnny Weiss worked on the building, and Jack Train and I worked on air dock. And so you can see that the curtain wall was very much in. We were trying to find out how to build buildings quickly and rapidly, and this was a part of the beginning of Skidmore, Owings & Merrill. The next sequence now is the sequence where we really had to put it all together. We finally, when we were given the opportunity to do the Air Force Academy, we had to have the academy built in 4 years. The commitment was that the senior class would graduate on campus, and we didn't start until they started at Lowry Air Force Base in temporary barracks. And so about 2 million square feet had to be constructed. I think my memory serves me correct, about 6 million cubic yards of dirt was moved as we reshaped the mesa. And then, of course, we had the conflict of being considered communist in the design of the Air Force Chapel. I had that particular burden to carry. The upper left-hand corner is an early program chart. It practically faded from view, that was shown to congressmen and senators and generals and citizens groups. And I can recall that the gray area represents the square footage that was a demand for the cadets. The yellow area, the total square footage for the town of 8,000, which we were to build, and the other were backup services for both elements. Now, then you can see the kind of thing that we had now moved into. We were now a much more sophisticated firm. We could work with models. These models at 40th scale. We thought you'd like to see the sequence of the model. The upper left hand in the middle is the first model. It was photographed by Ezra Stoller. We simply cut out a piece of cardboard and put it behind and backlit it, and that represented the academy, the silhouette of the mountains behind the academy, and a fairly accurate rendition. And of course, that is the first chapel, which was turned down when the senator from West Virginia got up in the Senate, and said, "I don't hear the rustle of angels' wings." And I'm not very good at a southern accent, but he was very good at demolishing the building. And so when he didn't hear the rustle of angels' wings, the building rustled out of view. And literally I cried, and Owings tried to console me. And he said, "Well, before we go to Congress again, have you ever seen sharks?" I said, "In picture books." And so he said, "Well, you're going to see sharks." So I went off for 6 weeks and went from London to Italy, from the English Gothic to the French Gothic to the French Romanesque to the Italian Romanesque and the Italian Baroque, and the works. And I finally got it for about 35 days, and it was an intense program. I was all by myself on this schedule that I was to come back and redo and redesign the Air Force Chapel. And I finally got down to Italy, and I really became terribly impressed with Michelangelo's work. And it got to be kind of a joke with myself. I get up in the morning and I say, "Well, Mike, what am I going to see of yours today?" And it got to be kind of a talking relationship in my own terms with what I was interested in, although the chapel itself does not really reflect that kind of direct contact, because it relates, and I suppose, with the tetrahedrons more to Gothic than to the Renaissance and the Baroque. But it was a terribly important part, and I was not alone. Chuck Wiley went to Rome and studied in Rome. Other designers traveled to Europe. There was an opportunity and expansion in the firm that we should participate in the larger understanding of the world in which we had been a part, and that because most of us were Second World War, in which the trips were, shall we say, of necessity different, this kind of program led to another expansion in the kind of opportunity that Skidmore, Owings & Merrill could then do. And then we went from that, of course, to the Academy proper. You can see the building, and you can see two things in this that I think is terribly important to recognize historically. One, we had a panel of 5 consultants, which the Secretary of the Air Force had. And they were Pietro Belluschi, Welton Beckett, Wally Harrison, H2L2, the firm in Pennsylvania, now the chemistry formula. That's what I remember their name. Harbison, Huff, Livingston, and Larson. Mr. Larson, Roy Larson, and Eero Saarinen. And Eero was tremendous. He was a tremendous influence on the project. Not that the buildings looked like him, but he insisted that we do our best. He often told us when we had not. He fought hard for us when he was convinced that we had done as well as we could, and played a very important role which doesn't occur right now in the field of architecture. There was a sense of cooperation among the leaders in the field, and there was this sense of participation. And it's important to recognize, because there's nothing out there that really says that. The buildings, it's just hard to believe, but the building in the upper right-hand corner, the administration building, has 1 million square feet and costs $21 a square foot. I just can't believe that the building could be duplicated today for less than 70. And so it just, there's a sense of time in terms of, again, those other byproducts, the gross national product. You notice the campus on the left. You'll notice a garden in the lower right, which was an effort to show that to the Air Force that they will not always march to dining. That's our bet. We still haven't won it. They still march. But it's a beautiful garden done by Dan Kiley, and it's an important addition to the campus. And just like in the slide on panel 4, were the lower gardens, the secret gardens for the cadets to hide. But the next series of slides we'll go through quickly. They represent, of course, Kahn. I thought you ought to know Dr. Kahn's sort of first project in Skidmore, Owings and Merrill. Really major impact was the precast, pre-stressed highway bridges, which are the entrance to the Air Force Academy. You see in the lower right-hand corner. The other buildings are simple post and beam. They haven't got any complications in terms of structure. But the lower right-hand corner was a more elaborate building, a more elaborate engineering design, and albeit the chapel has a lot of engineering to it, it itself was not a complicated one and did not come from the engineering staff, but was a product out of my mind rather than out of an engineering study. You see that in contrast in the upper right-hand corner. Next series. The chapel itself, I won't go into, except to show you that it was also a veering away point. As far as I myself was concerned, I have sometimes been called the only partner out of step in Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, and I guess this perhaps proved it at the time. And it was a building that had conflict within the firm as well as outside of the firm as to whether it should be built. And Gordon decided that I had the right to do it and that it would be done, and therefore the conflict within the firm was stopped. And then the conflict became one of publicity, and as I said, it was considered a communist effort, a diabolical effort to undermine the Air Force. And it turned out hardly more than any of us had bargained for, and last week they had their 10th anniversary of the dedication of the chapel. They've had 10 million visitors to the building. It now has a tape recording, if any of you have been there, and has been sort of endowed with the kind of aura of history that you don't always have an opportunity as an architect to participate in. It was, of course, a special part of my life, and began a more concerted effort in the search for non-orthogonal buildings, and this was, in my own, for myself, a special parting of the ways from the standard way of doing things. As I said earlier, if there's another partner here tonight, he would show you his way and his point of departure. I cannot identify them all, but if I can, I will. Incidentally, I could not convince the Air Force to hire an artist to do the windows, so I spent a year in the living room floor and did them all out of colored piece of paper, and that's the one thankfulness about the controversy. It gave us the year to do the windows. And the windows were done, and that's a long story for another time, but it represents an important kind of building. But what is most important is kind of an attitudinal change in Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill. You see in the upper right a contemporary church. I think it's out of sequence, so we'll hold number 3 for the next time, and run, and you can see another one. Next series, please, except for number 3. You can see that we've done since churches in the upper right-hand corner next to Cabrini Green in Chicago, and a beautiful little chapel out in San Francisco, and and a beautiful museum in Buffalo, in addition, that Gordon Bunshaft did. And I think it sort of epitomizes the other change that occurred about the same time, in which we could design our own temples. And Gordon was exquisite and has been exquisite at doing temples, and you can see the early Greco-Roman one by the original architect on the left in the lower right-hand corner, and the very severe, elegant one of Gordon Bunshaft on the right. But then all the buildings were not fancy, all the programs were not fancy. We were also involved in other buildings. In this case, we'll look quickly at hospitals. Hospitals sometimes with sculpture, as you can see the Richard Hunt on the lower right, but you will see in this a study of the search for hospitals and hospital planning. You'll notice that the scheme in panel 2, it's a rather mundane standard plan, and it had many changes in the future, which we'll shortly see. Next. We can see the change to the pavilion scheme of breaking away from the single building. It's the mental health clinic. You can see also right-hand corner and the model down below, a further extension of that in terms of hospital design. And then you can see a more standard plan with the cross shape in the upper left-hand corner. So you can see that within programmatic needs, there's a variety of solutions, and not all of them are the same, and at least there is not a pat answer, or is there a pat design. Housing has always been a kind of a wishful dream on the part of all the designers in SOM. I think we'd all like to do housing. There's a natural desire to do it. We have not. When this 1950s brochure was done for MoMA, Museum of Modern Art, that was a really elegant scheme for Lake Meadows with the beautiful facade and sidewalks in the sky. It got bastardized into a more mundane Le Corbusier solution, which you see in the upper left-hand corner, and that is Lake Meadows that you see as being built. At the same time, we began worrying about housing in the middle, housing on the right, apartment houses in the lower right in Chicago, and retirement homes out in California. And you begin to see a kind of regional character taking place in the work of the firm. So you don't see the technology itself coming forward, but the individual, more or less regionalism beginning to appear. So we go on from that to other kinds of housing. We have Poinciana in Florida, which, albeit done in the Chicago office, begins to reflect the materials of the environment. You see in panel 4, the lower left-hand corner, and yet a very contemporary idiom when you look inside. You see the simpler masonry bearing wall building in the upper left-hand corner, as it's done in Portland. And you can see a home for retired people in Pennsylvania in the upper right-hand corner, and you see the materials in the idiom of Pennsylvania beginning to appear within the designer's idiom. Now, these are later projects, and that they are later projects with the amount of work occurring, you begin to see less coordinated effort towards trying to make an image product or trying to develop a single image which says Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill. Now, when we look at the last sequence in this area, we see hotels. We see the Istanbul Hilton, which was done by Gordon Bunshaft. We see the Portland Hilton, which is a kind of a tough, straightforward building and a simple, straightforward plan, and the highly romantic Ala Moana of Chuck Bassett, which came out of the San Francisco office. And you can see that in cross-section, in which you get a building which tries to search for the unique characteristics of a posh recreation area for Hawaii. And as I said Ala Moana, I meant Mauna Kea. Ala Moana was an effort at a shopping center about 20 years ago, which did not occur. At least as far as we're concerned, it is very much a project, but Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill were not the architects. And then in terms of apartments, we see the fancy urban apartment on Palisades Heights and the scheme in panel 3 in the upper right, the interior in the lower left, and then the interior shown of an apartment in Hancock. At the same time, you see the much more mundane problem of a Hilton Inn as it was tackled in Portland. So you begin to see the low-rise and the high-rise beginning to seek their own vernacular. And then as we move into other kinds of building types, we begin to see the kind of building that Myron Goldsmith, who is going to talk rather than Bruce Graham, he's going to talk on long-span structures and can talk very elegantly about it in a few weeks. And when he talks about it, you will go into that history and you'll see some of the background of this as it occurs in the history of Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill. But I'll let Myron dwell on it more. especially since he was a major participant in the very beautiful bandbox building at the top for Oakland Stadium and the Oakland basketball arena. And then you see this project down below. You can see the effort in a more modest kind of project, which is not related to the project topside. And then the latest one, which the San Francisco office has done by itself. In fact, I think you can see the difference in the way form as an aesthetic on the building in the lower right, as it was handled sort of in the 1972 idiom, as the way Myron handles it in the more structuralist idiom. And these are for Iran, and if anyone can pronounce it any better than I, it's Ara Yamur Sports Center, which is currently under construction. And this is the model, and it has the same kind of roof and a series which is repeated around a site plan, and a series of different kinds of enclosures below. You're looking at the left on one which I think is for I forgot. One of them swimming and the other's athletics of another kind. The reason for the difference in form, naturally, is the seating has to be different for a very specified and very specific building type. This is a phenomena of the 70s. I don't know what your phenomena of the 80s is going to be, but sports stadiums are being built for the America professional football teams, in Africa for track teams, in Asia for Asian games, and you all know what happened in Munich for that very elegant series of building repairs there. So this is a unique phenomena, relates to sort of gang sports for spectators and television. I think after we get over our television binge, we may better understand what to do. But these are going to remain like pyramids to this moment in time. And I think they're an interesting phenomena, and you can all see how they've been done in how many different ways. And structure, as it's seen in simpler form, you can see it in a kind of hyperbolic paraboloid for a primate center. You can see where the mesh has been strung in the mathematical number. I helped participate on many years ago in Portland. And you see the monkeys climb all over the mesh. And in the lower right, a building in which Myron has participated in, if I'm saying it correctly, yes, in which Inland Research, a very elegant building, more or less in the Mesian idiom. Next series. You can begin to see a diversity now, and we're moving into education, and we'll just move through these without explanation. I think you understand. Now we're starting back in the upper left-hand corner, 1954, with a little school for the deaf. Again, a little wood building. It was when Belushi, Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill, moving on to a wider range of buildings as we go through this sequence. And we'll just do more sophisticated buildings, larger buildings. We'll just run them through. We can, operator. Or I will. Of course, you can see the sophistication of the Yale Library up there of Gordon. Technology Center, an elegant building for a solar telescope up on the left. transition in terms of form as followed by structure, and the bottom left, form as it governs and materials relating to is the Regenstein Library. U.S. Naval Postgraduate School in the upper left-hand corner, which is the first school I ever worked on in 1950, and the bottom is the Regenstein Library in 1972. So within my own frame of reference, you can see the transition itself. Small buildings we do, as well as large buildings. Buildings still in 1970, like the upper right-hand corner, as small as 5,000 square feet, or a gymnasium at IIT in the lower right-hand corner, as small as, say, 11,000 feet, to the office buildings we'll shortly see. But as we go into education, we'll just flip these slides and kind of take a look. You'll see the West Coast now. The West Coast and their junior college. You begin to see a kind of idiomatic regionalism for Oregon or up in the mountains to the city above, and then the next series of slides. You see Stanford University begin to appear in the lower right, and Stanford University up above. Then its counterpart by designers who worked for the San Francisco office, now transported to Washington, D.C. in the Gonzaga High School gym. And then a very nice site plan for a scheme for California, in which you see the intimacy of the scale and the low rise. Again, you see form relating to program in this particular case, relating to small junior college. Then from that to a building as large as 1 million square feet, and with 1 million square feet of building, you find it's much more complex to plan. So you see that the charts in the upper right-hand corner, the lower left, are charts we worked out, plotting over 1,000 spaces and their correlation to the plan. You also see a feedback to technology in terms of the aesthetics and form, and here you see a kind of synthesis between form and technology. This is the Geological Survey at Reston, Virginia. And then, of course, the universities played a tremendous part in the growth of Skid Row and Merrill, and we'll just go through these slides. We'll take first the University of Illinois, and notice at the beginning, the early buildings, which follow a simpler pattern, and then they become more enriched. And yet you can see that from the chapel, this plaza was the second excursion beyond the orthogonal, as far as our work of our group. And these are the exedra which you just sit on in the lower left-hand corner. They're the public benches of the center of the university. For those of you who have been there, you can see the plan of the lecture rooms below, upon which they reflect the shape. You can see the geometries of the drawing in the center. You can see them, of course, as they are completed. So they begin to represent a change and transition of one kind. We'll see another change and transition when we get into high-rise buildings in just a few minutes. We're out of sequence on 3 and 4. Can you drop back one on 3 and 4? I don't know how I can remember these slides. Drop back one on 3. No, that's right. No, you're ahead on 4 was correct. Now on 3. Back one on 3. That's it. Every firm has its projects that never get built. I thought I'd show you one. I think today it costs about $250 million, so I know it'll never get built. It was to outdo, in a sense, Lincoln Center. It was not for New York City, obviously. It was built on the concept that performance required individual vehicles for performance, just as an instrumentalist needs individual vehicles for performance. Why there's a violin, a viola, a cello, a bass. All of these represent a change in the need of timbre, of performance, of scale. And so this was devised that for theater, there should be the same opportunity under one roof. And you can see, starting in the using the walkway level plan on panel 4, you could see an arena theater, a proscenium theater for 1,500. I'm going clockwise to the blue octagon. The purple is a proscenium theater for 1,500. Next come two specialized theaters at $299. Then comes a small proscenium theater for 500. Next comes a Shakespearean theater, and next comes an open stage. It was a grand plan. It was for a special client who was supposed to have it done in her honor when someone died. Well, the person never died, so the money never came. And sometimes the old live forever. But it was to be a nifty thing, and it was a very exciting project. We had to keep it under wraps. This, in fact, is the first time this has been shown, simply because it is a part of history now. And then we go from this to the next series of 5, which is why it was to be such a special thing, because it was to be architecture as electronics. It was to be night architecture. The architecture itself was to really be a backdrop for lighting. It was to be a way in which you had a sense, not of Broadway with its jumble of signs, but a new kind of use of light as form, and represented one of our excursions which may see the light of day, but it will not see the light of day in this project. Shall we go on? decision is, do the women have a whole floor? Do the women and men share a floor? If so, what are the boundary conditions in this shared john? It has been done both ways, so what turned out to be a rather mundane building has been an experience in the New World. Shall we go on? Student Union, the theater, also for Grinnell. Again, very small buildings, very modest buildings. And these, of course, represent kinds of buildings that you think about maybe less when thinking about Skibbereen and Merrill because of the great volume of office buildings that are done. And now we're going to start some of the office buildings. And the office building most famous, really, is Connecticut General, done in 1957. You can see it in the upper right-hand corner, and in the lower left-hand corner with the Noguchi sculpture called The Family. And you can see, again, Gordon Blunchat. You can see the impact of Gordon on our work at the Air Force Academy, because it was done at about the same time we were working on both the Academy. You'll also see that the base is handled very differently. If you look at that bottom, it's what I call a New York base. You can always tell the bottom of a New York building compared to Chicago, San Francisco, Portland. They have a way of making it look more like furniture, in my mind. Now, Gordon would kill me if you heard me say that, than architecture. But this is a very unique way he has about making a building come to the bottom. And that's his way of doing it. And you see it first exhibited in 1957 in a very important building for Skibbereen and Merrill. And it went on to develop many clients in the low-rise suburban building, which you see now a plethora of them beginning to appear as they come over the countryside. And the kinds of forms you see relate to again the character of the environment. They're mostly low-rise buildings. And even the factory buildings that Shell Square, which says the same thing more or less in concrete, as an effort to try to define the continuous wall as it's supported in terms of masonry, and you see it both in the high version and a mini-high version at the World Bank in the middle. But here you sense structure as versus form in the Chicago office, and form versus structure in the other two offices. So you see there are searches in two different arenas for the high-rise building. This beginning of coming together, as you see the second the second Hartford. In the middle picture up above, you see the first Hartford with very delicate form. The second building, which is absolutely smooth. Black granite and smooth windows. It has a structure which has been all worked out carefully on the computer, very carefully at the bottom. The columns swell. You can't see it on this drawing, but you can see it on the lower left hand of another building where you notice the mullions of the continuous wall begins to swell at the bottom. In other words, protrude from the skin, and the top is smooth. Now these become highly subtle images, expressions of what is going on in the computer and what is going on in trying to say how to build a high-rise building. And of course, Sears, and again, the Chicago's answer to trying to say something about the smooth building. And the building in the second, Jim DiStefano is going to be down here in several weeks, and he's going to talk about the building at the top. And the building at the top is First Wisconsin, which is by far the tallest building in Milwaukee, and represents to Milwaukee what Hancock originally meant to Chicago. And Jim is going to take you through that as a designer and the design process. But you can see in it a kind of transition in the effort of looking at what buildings are about. And then we begin to see again the long span of the building on the left, which we talked about why a steel building is essentially different than the concrete one with a continuous wall. And then we begin to see the kind of low-rise buildings, and we move into planning. 3 and 5 have to be advanced. How about 3? 2, I'm sorry. Apologize. Can't come. Oops, no, ahead. Right. Planning is always an unintelligible drawing to anyone but the planner. And you can see, however, we won't dwell on them, but one of the aspects of SOM has been something larger than just the individual building. Has been, we saw it earlier on the university campus, the search for the campus plan as a whole. Here you can see the problem of looking at planning and its various components. Involved with a highway on the lower right, and the problems in Boston, in transit, and do you build a highway? The team in Boston decided that a freeway should not be built. And they are the people supporting the governor on why other modes of transit should be incorporated with the automobile in the 70s. So they're part of the new look at looking at transportation. The panel 4 shows one of the problems of trying to coordinate development around transit stops. How can we get some kind of orderly growth where there is a transit node? We talk about it academically, but it doesn't yet occur. On the problem of the middle one on the top is something that Louis Kahn loves to talk about, and it's a phrase, an intercept strategy. However, Kahn would be much more poetic. His choice of words, of arrival, the sense of arrival, the feeding of the understanding of what's going on. But there's an effort both in this diagram and what Lou's attempting to do when he talks about the city and the movement systems. In the upper right is the hard reality of just doing a transit station. How do you do a elevated station? How do you try to do nice trackage as it goes across the countryside? As you can see that white structure, which Myron Goldsmith struggled on for about a year and a half. You can see other forms of planning as they relate to development of malls, the enclosing of spaces, what could happen, whether it's Market Street East, which is a proposal in which we were the 9th architectural team given the project, and it was the 10th team that got theirs built. And so we were one of a long series of people, and looking at Market Street East in Philadelphia. At the same time, it was a great opportunity to begin to understand what is happening on malls and what is happening in the center city as well as outlining areas. And next week, you're going to have an introduction on the development of a shopping center as a technique of a brand new building type, which I have not gone into here, and which represents an effort of part of the office that will be discussed by, I think, Tom Rosengren. You see Market Street East is a system in the middle panel above. As you look at it, it's the juncture of the infrastructure of all the services of an urban city with the vertical buildings above and how they will work. You look at the lower drawings and you see, and Nat said, "Are you showing Washington?" I said, "Yes, Nat, I am showing Washington," because the mall has been really a part of Nat's life, and the ability to, that reflecting pool he spoke of, you see in the foreground of the model, and below the Capitol, above the Capitol in the model, and the effort which is still going on to try to get a new sense of form and structure to the nation's center city. You have here at smaller scale Elkhart and in Indiana as a part of urban renewal. And you have towns Newark, and in this case lower right is Detroit for the concept of a paired new town. So the search in the new town haven't yet happened, but they're still part of the program. Again, in urban design, these are urban design studies. They are not, in a sense, real projects. They're more searching for the program with a client and with a city as to what the issues must be and how to tackle the problem and how to move ahead in some kind of capital program for the particular area. Sometimes it's planning if it involves residential development. You see in the lower left-hand corner out in Oregon, where they're very interested in developing units that fit into the ecology. In the middle above, it was the problem of trying to do a burned-out street in Newark in the development of model cities. And then you can see the breakthrough, I think the breakthrough project lower right. I must say I cannot take credit for the breakthrough project in Indianapolis. I was the sort of godfather to the planners in the concept of developing the program. And all of us, of course, have been disappointed in what the industrialized products that have sprung like Jason's swords on the site. They're really lousy. And this is what Whitney talks about. This was the demolition experiment in Pruitt-Igoe, an effort to build anew by building on top of a culture. This was these buildings that would be torn down were to be made into hills, and these hills were to be landscaped and to be a part of the scene and represent an amazing history into the problem of what do we do about recycling our mistakes as well as to living with all our successes. And then this last sequence, first by comparison. The fourth Dearborn project was in 1949. These drawings were prepared at that time. You notice, in a sense, the techniques have not changed. And we had the audacity to take all of 10 acres north of the river of the Loup. It was considered a very radical program to go to the mayor and say, let's look at 10 acres north of the Loup. And you'll notice the area in green on the lower left hand was to be offices, and the area in orange above was to be residential. Now we'll compare that with the audacity so-called of Project 21, Chicago 21 on the next sequence of slides, which chooses to go from all of Chicago Center City from the north to the south, throwing in about 50 acres of railroad yards, and begins to look at the infrastructure, mauling State Street on the right, developing new transit systems for housing on the upper left. But if you notice on the drawing on the upper right, but on the upper left, the area in orange above the river is still housing. And so from 1950, so to speak, until 1974, the land use for one particular area of the city has not changed. And it's interesting, it's because no one still knows what yet to do with it. Next series. And so with that, you can see, and this project, of course, sort of defies, I think, conception. All of the white are new buildings projected between now and the year 2000 for Chicago. In the upper right hand, you can see on the double slide that instead of doing the little area modestly to the right, the new project goes the whole center city of Chicago. It's called Chicago 21, and it sort of represents the kind of enthusiasm and scale that Nat started us out with, which I guess we still haven't lost. So this is an attempt on my part to give you a sense of SOM in history, not so much as history as just yesterday and today, but what it may mean to you, hopefully, and what it's meant to us. Thank you very much. But don't say the fifth slide in the second series, and if you do it. But I think you've seen enough tonight. We'll talk about other things tomorrow. Good night.